I followed the news story about the cyber attack on the car manufacturer Jaguar Land Rover with great interest. It wasn't just the fact it was attacked by some malicious entity, but that it had such massive impacts on the supply chain. Those suppliers were not that far away from the factory, so the local economy felt the impacts too. So why am I talking about this? Because I wanted to find out how emergency services are tackling the problem of cyber attacks. What are they doing to prevent that happening to them? Imagine your local police force disabled through a cyber attack, unable to take 999 calls, blind to the resources they can send to respond to incidents. It doesn't bear thinking about, does it? I'm Catherine Levin, editor of Emergency Services Times, and in this episode of Forever Response, I talked to Chris Cope, who is the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, for the Police Digital Service. And for this series of the pod, we are all about tech perspectives with our partners, the Emergency Tech Show and the Police Digital Service. It is apt then that we conclude this mini-series of the pod with our partners. Chris has been CISO for the last 12 months, but has been with PDS for just over 4 years. His 25-year career spans many government departments in different information assurance and governance roles, as well as in cybersecurity. The name changes, but the jobs are quite similar, he tells me. We start with Chris telling me that cybersecurity isn't a technical subject hidden away in the IT department.
When people talk about cyber, they assume it's massively technical, and the reality is this is not a technical problem. This is a business or operational problem. Ultimately, what people want is their data in the right place at the right time. They want confidence that that data which needs to be secured is secure and that hasn't been tampered with. Those are the operational impacts that we're trying to defend against. So when we talk whether it's cybersecurity, information assurance, information security, data security, whatever, those are really the sort of things that we should be focusing on, not the technical nitty-gritty when we're talking to people outside of that technical environment. There are people who are very technologically strong within cyber, and that's good, but ultimately we're all there to support the wider organisation, and what they care about is the impact to their operations.
I think it's really useful to frame it as a business problem, because one of the issues around cyber, I think, is it seems quite distant, something quite ephemeral for people. It's like it happens over there with technical people. So you are involved with the PDS National Management Centre, and that is linked to this idea of cyber attacks, which we hear about on the news and see the devastating effect of it. So in terms of that national system, what is that doing to help with this business problem as you've just framed it?
Yeah, so the National Management Centre is part of PDS Cyber Services. That's the wider team that at a national level supports police forces and national systems. So the NMC is there to do a number of roles. Probably its initial scope was to look at the detection of unwanted events across policing. So people logging in when they shouldn't be logging in, or from places they shouldn't be logging in from, and then trying to work out, is that actually a security risk, or is that just somebody who's taken a laptop overseas and not told anybody? Are we looking at, for example, significant amounts of data being extracted from systems? Other trigger events that we can go, actually, for that particular force, that's a problem. And now what we do is we work with the force. So the NMC has been set up to work collaboratively with police forces. It doesn't operate on its own. It's not a standalone entity as such. It will detect the issues. It will then speak to the forces and say, we've seen this problem. We recommend you do the following to mitigate the risks that that could pose. And the force will then go away and carry out those actions. And in the 6 years or so that the NMC has been running, it's built an excellent relationship with forces doing just that, being that trusted partner to give them a capability they don't usually have in-house.
So I was thinking, as you were talking about, it sounds a bit Big Brother, you're being watched all the time, but you use the C word, the collaboration word, which is obviously what we want to see in this space. Also, you talk a little bit there about, it's quite prosaic, some of that, isn't it? It's very basic, like someone's taking a laptop abroad and they're using it and they shouldn't be using it abroad. It's like very basic kind of, the things you do, you switch on just to check something, but actually you shouldn't. And then you've got this kind of spectrum right through to, the threat actors, which we'll come on to talk about, the people who want to do massive damage. And so that spectrum, how does your organisation deal with that in terms of managing? What does that look like? If I was a graph, is there tons of stuff at the kind of low level end and not so much at the big end? What's the sort of extent of the work?
Indeed. So a lot of, you mentioned taking laptop overseas. I mean, that sounds quite routine. And in some cases it is. But I mean, what we're looking for there is that maybe your account has been compromised and somebody in a third country is now trying to log in to your UK account. So that's why we look for those things. And a quick security plug, that's why it's so important to get permission to take devices overseas, because it will flag. Those sorts of things do come up, and I'm very happy to say that the vast majority of things we find usually have quite a simple explanation that we can resolve with the force. But we do see a variety of more technical attacks. We see lots of phishing attempts on individuals. We see lots of, I'll use the term threat actors, and I'll probably have to explain that a bit more in a bit. We use the term threat actors, and we see how they are trying to probe our networks to find weaknesses and vulnerabilities, which they can then exploit afterwards. And we've worked closely with pretty much every police force to identify unusual behaviour. And really, that's what we're looking for. What's normal, and then what isn't normal. And is that a sign of compromise or somebody attempting to compromise? Or is it just something totally benign that just happens to be unusual for that particular day?
So that spectrum then runs from the day-to-day, as you've described, into the, what is going on, the things happening here. How do you go about working out what the trends are? So I was going to ask you what a cyber threat looks like today. You might not want to go into too much detail about that, but in terms of what you see across forces, and you can see like trends and things that are changing over time, how do you sort of identify the evolving threat that you see from the outside and put things in place in a more predictive way rather than simply responding to them? How does that work with your work?
There's an art to that, I suppose. So we do, within the NMC, we have a very proactive threat team, which does a few things. One, it liaises with other organisations, because the best lesson is one that you learn from somebody else. So, what can we see from other organisations, entities such as the National Cybersecurity Centre? How do we own our own Home Office as well, for example? What else has happened out there? What are the indicators of compromise? What are the triggers we need to be looking for, so we don't just wait to see the impact? We can find the trigger and respond to it. So that's the first thing, trying to be a bit proactive. What we also look at is our trends and what are we seeing, and we try to push that back into forums such as the Police Information Assurance Board and our own routine communications out to forces as well. We provide a number of routine threat briefings, weekly, monthly, and ad hoc when something comes up, basically saying, this is what we've seen, be that a very specific threat that you need to take action right now, or this is stuff that we're seeing that's built up over time, you might want to consider following. But in each case, what we try and do is present, here's what we've seen, and this is what we recommend you do about it, so a force can take that and actually do something meaningful with it. What we try not to do is just set hairs running with no real control over what a force should do next.
Yeah, I'm sure they appreciate that, having actually been, having the answers from you. But I wonder about the pace of change, so that things are evolving very, very quickly. And when one thing works, another thing doesn't work, and then people are changing what their tactics because they want to get your data or whatever it is they're after. How do you keep up?
And we have a saying that you have to run to stand still in cybersecurity. It is evolving all the time. The threat actors will try new techniques. There's increasing sophistication. For example, at one point, a few years back, a phishing email was fairly straightforward to spot. It would be full of spelling mistakes. It would be bad English. It would be really vague. It was quite easy to spot. Now they are becoming increasingly sophisticated, particularly with the use of AI to help attackers. So we have to improve what we can do on a technology basis as well, both with the monitoring and through promoting additional controls through Microsoft accounts, etc., to try to filter out some of the bad actors. But it is becoming more sophisticated. Cyber criminals in particular obviously are making significant amounts of money off ransomware. If they didn't, they would stop doing it. You can very easily see for yourself the call center approach they have set up in various locations, even down to having their own service desks for helping victims pay their ransom. So this is obviously a very successful model for them, and it's successful because, at an ultimate level, it is very difficult to operate an IT system completely devoid of risk. You have to take a little bit of risk somewhere. And in some cases, they're able to exploit organizations that struggle to implement security to a higher level. So the threat is ever evolving, and I think we'll be talking about AI shortly, but AI has just added a new dimension to it.
Yeah, so we will move on to AI. I want to talk to you about Mythos as well, actually, to see, give what you've just said about vulnerabilities within organizations. In terms of the ransomware and the phishing, fundamentally, we want the staff working in the emergency services to be on it, to know and identify. And as I do in my organisation, you get sent phishing emails to test you. And then when you fail them, you get told to go to training. And it all becomes a bit kind of humdrum. So how do you give people the kind of incentive to take it seriously, to understand the impacts and do it in a way that isn't just seen as routine? How do you do that when you're continually getting all these attacks, getting all of these changes, but you need the people to be there to provide the first sort of defense, I suppose? So what are you finding across police forces?
Security education and awareness is one of those where you have to try to keep it interesting and engaging, and be very aware that you can certainly overdo it and people then turn off. I suspect everybody has seen those online education activities where you click through, answer a few basic questions, and actually be certified for 12 months. That works from a compliance point of view. Yes, we've done security training. Probably doesn't shift the dial that much. We are looking as part of our cyber strategy about how we can provide improved cybersecurity training to everybody in policing, both police officers and police staff. Because what's important for a policeman is to be able to see themselves reflected back in the training. That's the same for any organisation. If it's a generic off-the-shelf product, it probably isn't going to work for you. We need to give them something which they can actually relate to in their day-to-day. So that's something we're working on with forces and with training partners to be able to deliver something that actually works. The other stuff we look at is improving culture by trying to promote or trying to encourage people to be open and honest. This isn't about blaming people. Everybody can click on the wrong link at some point. It happens. So it's not about trying to foster blame. It's about trying to have a culture where people are open and are happy to put their hands up and say, yeah, I've just done that, made a mistake. Can you please now rectify that mistake, rather than try and hide it? And you've given an attacker a route into the system which they have time and space to exploit because it hasn't been reported. So it's, on balance, what we try to do is have an open system, and we try to encourage people to be honest with us, and then we can take the appropriate action, or the force can take the appropriate action to keep everybody safe.
And have you found any police officers who are willing to come and be your actors to do this training? Will you actually use frontline people?
That's a really good point. We haven't quite got to that stage yet, but if I'll use this opportunity. If everybody fancies being on TV or on a education podcast in the coming near future, please do let me know.
Maybe we'll get some people who respond to that. That'd be fascinating. So behaviour change, really important, and taking it seriously and doing it in a way which is meaningful, as you've just described. I want to just talk to you briefly about the PSNI data breach. So it was a couple of years ago now where an FOI request was responded to by the police service in Northern Ireland by a member of staff, and attached to it was an Excel spreadsheet which had the data of serving officers in the PSNI, which proved to be a very difficult situation for the organisation. It's not a cyber attack, it's a security breach, but it's done by an individual. So I just wondered, how do we understand that kind of activity in the sense of our conversation around cyber? It's human error, it's not a cyber attack, but how do you get organisations to kind of understand the need to be aware? What have you learned since then within policing to make sure things like that couldn't happen again?
So I think there's a few things to unpack there. So first up, we tend to look at more information assurance, which covers accidental breaches and even covers the loss of information in a non-digital way. So we try to cover all bases in that. I say cyber tends to lead down a technical path. the PSNI breach, and I was one of the audit team who went out after the PSNI breach to discover what happened and provide recommendations. It was one of those Swiss cheese moments where every single hole just aligned and a problem occurred. When you laid out all the things the succession of things that had to fail for that to happen, it was probably, if we'd used it as a training exercise, it wouldn't have had much credibility, but yet it still happens, which goes to show, despite your best efforts, sometimes you do have a bad day. And for PSNI, that was a particularly unfortunate event. And real world impacts for officers and staff thereafter were very severe. And those impacts are still being dealt with today. So this was not, this was an incident that really brought home how important information and information security is to policing in that context. In terms of how do we prevent this happening in the future? Well, there's a couple of things that spring to mind straight away, and that's the basics. So when we did the audit review on PSNI, and to be fair, when we look at any other force, there's no one single control you would say, yeah, that would definitely stop that ever happening again. What you're doing is implementing a range of defense in depth controls that between them should prevent something happening again. And that's what we always emphasize through our own other assurance activities, such as the security assessment for policing or SIAP or other control measures. It's not just there's no silver bullet to this that you can just do and go, there you go, I'm now sorted. It's a range of controls, both people, procedural and technical, that you've got to stay on top of to keep up with the evolving threat. I think the other thing I would say from the PSNI point of view is, even when you believe you're at a very good position from an information and cyber security position, bad things can still happen for whatever reason. So the importance of prior planning for the incident management and how to deal with those incidents when they occur is absolutely crucial. You can reduce the risk of cyber and information security events. You can never entirely eliminate it. So you have to be prepared to deal with that and then recover thereafter.
It's interesting that you refer to the Swiss cheese model. I love this idea of all the holes lining up and then all the risks, everything just runs through it. And that you introduced a new C word, which is control. So you had culture, we talked about people, now we're talking about controls. So I think maybe that it's the addition of those things together, it's the totality of that, isn't it, that makes you better, more resilient. Would that be the case?
Oh, 100% agree. So when we assess forces, the easy option would be to say, do you have the following technology in place? And we could give them a checklist and they could check it or not check it. But that only tells part of the story. So if you are bringing in a new control, you have to have the people to operate it, to monitor it, to look after it. And you've got to have a wider governance and culture in place to be able to do cybersecurity and information assurance properly. If you haven't got all that, then you may have some very new and expensive firewalls or monitoring solution, but it's not going to give you the effect you want. It's not going to reduce the risk to the level that you want it to. So this has to be from the top of a tree downwards driven at cybersecurity. Information assurance is important to the organization. We will incorporate it into routine daily activities. And yes, there's some technology here as well, which is important, but we have to make sure that it's not seen as something which happens over in the corner and they protect us. It is a team effort.
And do you see the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, sitting on the boards of policing? I'm not quite sure whether they have boards as such, but the senior leadership, do you see that role having that senior level position in order to have those conversations to make sure it goes back through the organisation? Are you still struggling to get it seen at senior leadership level?
I think it's a varied picture across policing. So not every police force has a CISO. They will have somebody who is the most senior person there responsible for cyber and information security. The position of that person in the police force does vary. There is absolutely a need to have somebody at the very top talking about cybersecurity and the importance of it to the organisation. Now, that in many people's dreams, that is a CISO type position. It's doesn't always quite work on that, but there should be somebody who is well briefed by that security advisor to say, these are the key points we need to land this month, and this is what we need to hammer home in terms of strategy moving forward. I'm very fortunate to sit on a number of key national boards, including the DDAT Coordination Committee, Police Information Assurance Board, and others, and National Technology Board, for example. So I can influence. And one of the key things I've been trying to do recently is get cybersecurity into National Technology Board, National Life Service Board, National Change Board, DDAT CC to a greater degree, so it's on everyone's minds. It's not the only thing they have to think about, but at least it's there being considered with all the other aspects. But it's really important to have a strong voice at the top of the tree. And we're very fortunate in our national IA lead, Commissioner Doherty, who's been an advocate for cyber and information security for quite a few years now.
Yes, and you're effectively describing a theme that's running through all of those other sort of pillars of national data management or strategic positioning for policing, putting cyber all the way through it, rather simply seeing it as a standalone thing, which seems sensible. Now, can I just take you back? I mentioned just now Mythos. So this is a product from not OpenAI, from Anthropic, who are looking to see how they could use AI to detect weaknesses within people's cyber defences at its simplest. I won't claim to know much more detail than that. I'm interested in, is policing look at this? I know it's not out commercially yet, but are you interested in testing it? How would that work in policing? So the sense of it being able to detect vulnerability long before you guys know about it. What sort of conversations are you having at PDS about Mythos?
So Mythos has captured the headlines, and I know that the American government is speaking to Anthropic to try and limit its use. But notwithstanding that, I think generally speaking, we are seeing advances in artificial intelligence, and that's a one-way trend. Those systems will continue to become more sophisticated, more advanced, be able to do more. The concept of trying to find weaknesses isn't new. We've done this for a long time. Traditionally, it would have been hiring a penetration tester who would come in with their bag of tools and they would run it across a network and they'd say to you, this is what's good, this is what's not so good. The concept of AI doing that basically means it can be done quicker and probably more thoroughly. The Mythos attack, when you look at how they actually did it, they provided Mythos with full access to a network and they turned off all the monitoring. So it was quite a noisy, in terms of detection, event that an organisation like the National Management Centre would have detected in policing. So in terms of an attack, it was a useful vulnerability test for the Anthropic people. It wasn't necessarily a real-world style attack. So it's really important when we deal with new technology, new threats, we don't overreact, we act appropriately. Clearly, things are moving in one way. So we work quite closely with Police.ai. Myself and the Police.ai director, Al Murray, co-chair the Police Mythos Working Group, and we're engaged with Home Office and other organisations to look at, well, where does this lead next? How can we look in more depth at these AI models? How can we use them? It's not all about attackers being able to attack us. It's how can we also use AI to defend policing? And that's something we're looking at quite strongly with the NMC at the moment. I mentioned earlier, you can't sit still. You have to keep moving, and incorporating AI into cyber defense is the logical next step. So yeah, there's a number of things that we have to look at when something like Mythos hits the headlines. But the key thing really is just trying to make sure we understand the exact context of how it was used, how can we prevent it being used against us, and what can we learn from these attacks.
I think it's very easy to get overexcited about new things like that when they do grab the headlines. I think you're right to show some caution. I'm interested that the work you're doing with Police AI. I interviewed Al Murray from the first episode of this series where we talked about Police.ai, and talking there about using AI as defense as well as prediction. What sort of defensive role could AI have in terms of cyber and improving that for policing? What could that look like?
Well, we've already mentioned one of them, which is vulnerability awareness. So allowing an AI model under our strict control to look at where the vulnerabilities are in particular networks. It is the function we've done traditionally using a person with a variety of tooling. Is there an option that we could do that using AI? And that's something it's something to explore. The other is on defensive monitoring. So the National Management Centre receives tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of alerts over a 12-month period from people just generating logs by doing stuff on their networks. AI would help filter out some of the noise and allow for any unusual activity, particularly where it's across multiple forces, to be identified quicker. So it's about using AI to augment the skills we already have and trying to make life easier for our analysts so they can focus their time on looking at genuine problems rather than trying to filter out the noise themselves.
Yes, that idea of it augmenting, I think, is a good one. Al talked a lot about responsible AI, about it being used. Does that come into the conversations you're having in this space as well, that it needs to be responsible AI, even if it's performing this kind of defensive, augmentive, is that a word? Augmenting functions? Is responsible AI underpinning all of that same concept?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, we can't just take a product off the shelf and hope for the best. And any use of AI, in some respects, AI is like any other software service that we may wish to use. You need to have some assurance that it's going to do what you want it to do, is going to work how you want it to work, that data you insert in there is going to be safe, etc. So we don't just grab stuff and use it and hope for the best. And the same would be very much, probably even more so in terms of cyber defense, because I want to have a very high degree of assuredness that if I'm using AI to defend police networks, it's going to do what I want it to do and not what somebody else wants.
And so how do you find the people to do all this work for you? These sound like quite tricky technical roles, at some of the things that you've talked about during this conversation. How do you entice people to join policing to do this work when you can't pay them as much as perhaps Anthropic or some of these big tech firms can? What's the case for police, for people coming and working with you, that means that they're not going to get paid the big bucks?
It's a fair point. There are higher salaries on offer elsewhere than in government service. And that's been the case for a long time. Where I see ourselves is we need to make sure that we offer people fulfilling career and that we invest in them and take them seriously. So we should, and part of police reform may offer us opportunities in this as well when we look at police forces. But is there an opportunity for people to grow in their careers as a force, or move between forces, or move from a force to PDS and back again, so we can give them the development they want, but keep them in policing rather than see them disappear outwards? Can we invest in training for them, both in terms of what the cyber strategy is trying to deliver, so continual training for cybersecurity professionals in policing, so they feel valued, they feel on top of their game, and also invest in some of these stock market courses as well, so people can really develop their talents and find where they want to go and stay within that particular community. And also making sure they have a good voice, so they are listened to, they are respected, they are seen as being, where appropriate, senior advisors and able to influence at a force and a national level. It's not just about money, I find. Many people I talk to in policing aren't here for the big bucks. They're here because they have a real passion for policing. Many have been involved for a very long time in this particular sector, all like myself have come from other parts of government but have stayed in government because they believe in a sense of purpose, and what they really want to do is make a difference. So we need to give them the tools to develop them to make that difference and allow them to be heard.
But it's a nice, compelling case for police IT. I'm pleased to hear that. Can I pick you up on police reform? So we are aware that there is a white paper. There are proposals to restructure policing potentially, and also to create a national police service. PDS will be part of the national police service. Is that definitely happening?
I believe that to be the case, yes. We're still waiting for details. So I only have as much as you do from what's been released in media. But we're still waiting for details how we'd fit into that. But I think their expectation will be that PDS will form part of that new NPS structure.
And do you think there'll be any impacts on the conversation we've had today around cyber as a result of the reduction in police forces? So if it moves from 43 to a dozen, which is a number I've heard, and I've mentioned this to my other conversations I've had in this series, do you think there'll be an impact of having less police forces on the work you're doing? Will it make a difference, good or bad?
I think in the short term, we need to be prepared for however many forces we reduce to. There will be some disruption as the forces realign, as different forces try to merge. There'll be potentially different technologies they have to sort out as well. So there is probably going to be a period of increased activity on our behalf to ensure that they are kept secure, because it's an obvious time for someone to try and see if they can find a vulnerability, because they know that some people will be departing organisations, some people will be moving jobs, etc. It's going to cause that sort of churn that someone is likely to take advantage of. So we need to ensure that from a national and local cyber perspective, we are prepared for that, and we're ready to meet those challenges. Long term, I think if there are larger organisations, then that could mean larger digital departments who may have a higher budget level to be able to manage the software they have. I suspect what we will see is a concentration from the number of systems used by 43 forces down to those used by a much lower number. Will drive some consistency as well, which would be a good thing for us as a community. So I think there's a lot of positives to take out of police reform, noting that we don't quite know what it looks like yet. But I think as a concept, I think it could be generally a positive one for cybersecurity in the long term.
Yes, and also just to keep an eye on that Swiss cheese model, I think, make sure some of those threats don't align, as you've described, as the churn happens, because that, when you have instability, that's when it can be exploited. So interesting to think of it in those terms. Can I talk to you about supply chain? So slightly different take on this. So at the moment, we're talking very much about police forces as standalone organisations who need to be protected and to make sure that they can function. But they also have a relationship with the supply chain. So when they're buying goods and services, which might be just one step or many points down the chain. And given what we've seen in other industries around Jaguar Land Rover in particular, I'm thinking about, do you have any thoughts about how policing is dealing with its supply chain to make sure it is resilient and it too is doing the same kind of things that you're doing to protect yourselves when it comes to cyber threats?
Yeah, it's a great question. And many of the incidents that you see in the news originate from supply chain. It's often seen as being, particularly into government organisations, is seen as being the weaker link in many cases. We have something called TPAP, that's third-party assurance for policing. And it's a scheme we've been running for the last couple of years for the national systems. And that's essentially assuring ourselves that the third parties who are responsible for managing big national systems meet a minimum requirement. That's where we want them to be. We're now expanding that, and we've been able to secure funding to provide additional tooling to all police forces. So essentially, we are rolling that scheme out across police, and so every single force will be able to identify from the list on TPAP, identify all those suppliers who've already been assured. That saves them having to reassure the supplier themselves, which saves them time, saves supplier time, and also gives us better visibility of how many forces are using a particular supplier. So if there are some quite important strategic suppliers, we can work more closely with them and make sure they are doing what they need to do to keep the community safe.
And how does that link with Blue Light Commercial as the procurement arm of policing, and would want to be interested in all those suppliers? How do you work together?
So we do work closely with Blue Light Commercial. I should say that some of this is national contracts, some of it is local contracts, so it is a mix. But we have worked for the last few years now with Blue Light Commercial on big contracts, helping to ensure that when they issue a tender, that the right security requirements are in the tender and that any subsequent contracts have security built in. The key to third-party assurance is all in the contract. If you have a strong contract that states very clearly what a third party has to do for you, then you are far more likely to have a positive outcome than something that's really vague. And that's my experience across all of government. So we do work closely with Blue Light Commercial. Obviously, they have their commercial processes, so we align to that. But we make sure that any suppliers that come through are vetted accordingly. And it's not just suppliers we're interested in, it's also local government, national government, universities as well, for example. We've started working quite closely with the police academic centres of excellence and to help them get to an assured level so that we can, again, avoid police forces all having to assure them repeatedly and ensure that police data given to a PACE is going to be looked after in the way that we'd expect it to.
Yeah, so that efficiency theme running through all of that. You will be at the Emergency Tech Show in September, your organisation, Police Digital Service. In terms of the conversations that you'll have with suppliers there, do you see some of what we've just talked about being part of those conversations about them being potentially suppliers into policing the kind of things that you expect from them. Does it give you a platform to be able to have those more detailed discussions face to face by coming to a show like ours?
It certainly helps, yes. I think many suppliers who are used to dealing with government are used to a supplier assurance scheme of some type. If any supplier who works for the Ministry of Defence will be very well aware of what they do in their supply chain, something called List X. Civil nuclear has something called List N, which is very similar. Policing has had some supply chain assurance traditionally. What we've done is standardise it a bit and spread the scope of it slightly as well, and involve better tooling for it. So we're always happy to take this message out to suppliers, and it will make our lives easier and their lives easier as well if we all understand the process. They know what's required of them, and then we can help them to meet that.
Good. So I expect you to have lots of conversations like that at the show. I do feel that you should be calling it List P. If they've got List X and List N, you should be List P rather than TPAP. But it might be too late for the branding on that one. So just as we come to the end of our conversation, I just wanted to just go to one other topic area, which is the relationship with the other emergency services. So policing doesn't work in isolation. And lots of the work that you've described here would equally apply to fire and ambulance, if different contexts, but much of it the same. How are you working with police, with fire and ambulance and other parts of the emergency services to create a multi-agency cyber resilience?
So that's a good question. And different blue light sectors have their own leads for cybersecurity. I've worked on several occasions now with colleagues over at the National Fire Chiefs Council to support them. And I've had many conversations with NHS colleagues as well. We do, on certain projects, I think the obvious one would be the Emergency Services Network. That obviously touches on a number of blue light partners. So we do engage quite frequently with other partners across blue light services and wider as well, the Ministry of Defence, for example, on projects like that, because we need to ensure that everyone is in step and we're not making assumptions on behalf of another sector which may have very different requirements to our own. So we do work quite close. I would say that policing as a sector is quite a sizable and complex sector, so there's an awful lot going on within it. So our focus is absolutely on policing, but we do obviously engage with colleagues from elsewhere in government, because policing doesn't have all the answers, and it's not uncommon to pick up a tidbit from somebody in health or somebody from another part of government that says we've done this and it looks like a great idea. So we see how we can adapt it for policing.
Yeah, because you are part of an ecosystem. You don't work in isolation. So I think that multi-agency working makes sense, particularly when we talk in operational terms about JESIP, this kind of interoperability, about on the front line, how that all works. I kind of see that working in a technology space as well. I wonder, do you do any training and exercising with, you talked about pen testing and penetration testing, but in terms of a training and exercising scenario where you would involve cyber as part of an overall exercise, and would you do that in a multi-agency environment? Has that taken place?
At a fledgling level, yes. So we have within cyber services our major event support offering, and we have supported a number of major events across the UK with cyber, both in terms of the planning, so the exercising and planning, but also the on the day itself, the cyber monitoring. So, for example, Eurovision. We had Eurovision within Merseyside a couple of years ago, Merseyside Police's area. That was a cross-departmental response and a planning exercise, which we lent into and provided the cyber input for it. So, yeah, we do activities on a fairly regular level. We also have cyber exercising very much as part of a course for senior officers at the College of Policing. And I know that Commissioner Doherty is very keen to involve us in discussions with wider entities. We've had discussions recently with the Army and others about how do we share best practice, and how would we cooperate if something very significant happens. So, we do discuss and plan for cross-community events.
Yes, I think it's really good to bring in Eurovision. I'm a big fan of Eurovision. It's and I do remember it being in Liverpool. In fact, we had them at the show. It's sort of the team who were behind some of that. So it's nice to be reminded of that. But I think also just this sense that cyber being involved in an exercise, which is normally seen as a frontline thing, isn't it? It's like something's gone really, really badly wrong. How do we deal with it? But actually, if at the same time you threw in a cyber incident, imagine the chaos it would cause. So hopefully people will be inspired. In fact, at the show, we've got a couple of people, Steph Buller and Rob Grayson, coming in to talk to us about top 10 tips for exercising, and maybe I'll ask them to add in a cyber element to that as well, which would be very exciting. So Chris, we have come to time. We have managed to go through an awful lot of stuff here. And I think what it demonstrates is the richness of this world that you're working in, this cyber resilience world, and how complex it is, and yet sometimes so banal and basic. It's a real range, isn't it? And it's a space that I think people will enjoy listening to this and finding out more about your work. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much for joining me today.
And thanks for having me.
Well, that was a bit of a surprise. I hadn't expected a chat about cyber to be so accessible and easy to understand. I'm glad we got to look at both proactive and reactive work, because, as I said at the start of this episode, the compelling news stories focus on the latter and rarely deal with the former. Isn't he calm and clear in the way he describes the world of cyber? And what I take from this is that at its heart, it is about people and behaviour. The traditional training paradigm, where you do your regular online training using an off-the-shelf package, works for compliance, but it doesn't shift the dial, he says, and I have to agree. So I'm taken by the idea of frontline cops being used in the training materials, bringing the topic to life and making it relatable. I hope PDS can make that work. And I'm delighted we got to talk about Mythos, which I thought had brought this topic bang up to date because, as he says, the pace of change in this world is huge. Ironically though, if I've heard of new capability, it's because I've read about it in The Guardian or another mainstream media source. But that probably means it's already out of date. My thanks to Chris for talking to me. That's it from me for now. This is the last episode of this short mini-series, but do look out for the next series. More on that soon. This series has been brought to you in partnership with the Emergency Tech Show and the Police Digital Service. If you like this topic, then be sure to join us at the show, because there's plenty more where that came from. And of course, PDS will be there too. The show takes place on the 16th and 17th of September at the NEC in Birmingham. Registration is now open and the link is in the show notes. Be sure to share, like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times.